In Power BI, an on-premises data gateway performs two main functions. Firstly, when working in import mode, for example when importing data from an Excel or CSV file, the on-premises data gateway is used to connect to the data source for the purpose of refreshing the data that's been uploaded into the cloud, so that the two versions of the data are in sync. And this is normally achieved via a scheduled refresh. When connecting to a SQL Server database using DirectQuery mode, the on-premises data gateway functions in a more bidirectional manner. It connects to the database and executes queries, then sends the results of those queries back into the cloud to be displayed in a report or dashboard. The first step in deploying an on-premises data gateway is, of course, to download and install the necessary software. And we can do this from the Power BI service. In the top right, click on the Download menu and choose Data Gateway. This takes us to the download page where we can click Download Gateway. And then we simply double-click on the downloaded file to run the executable. And when the installer launches, we can click on the Next button, which allows us to choose the mode in which we want to work. In an enterprise scenario, you'll almost certainly be working with an on-premises data gateway. The on-premises data gateway working in personal mode is really a plan B. And you'll use it in situations where, for example, you're not able to add a data source to an existing enterprise-wide gateway, but you do need to have a mechanism for refreshing a particular data source. So as a plan B, you can install the on-premises data gateway in personal mode, and this will permit you to get a scheduled refresh up and running very quickly. So here we're working in enterprise mode rather than personal mode, and we click Next. Once the install files have been downloaded and we're ready to do the install, we're given a polite reminder that we should install the on-premises data gateway on a computer that's always on. And we can click Next to begin the installation, accept the terms of use and the install location, and then click on Install. Once the installation is complete, we're ready to register the gateway, and to do this we need to sign in. And at this stage you simply enter your usual Power BI credentials. We can now register this gateway as the first gateway in a new cluster, or we have the option of adding it to an existing cluster. And on this occasion, we're starting a new cluster. When you register a new gateway, as we're doing here, you're effectively starting a new cluster. And the recovery key that you enter on this screen can be used again in the future if you want to register a new gateway as part of this same cluster. All you'll need to do at that stage is to activate this option, Add to Existing Cluster, choose the cluster from the drop-down, and then enter the recovery key that you entered when creating the first gateway in that cluster. So on this occasion we're starting a new cluster and we're coming up with a new gateway. And I'm going to call this one Training 7. And then I'll enter a recovery key twice. And you'll notice in the bottom right of the screen that we have the option of changing the region. The region that's been automatically selected, UK South, is the one that we need in this example. because that's the same region in which the Power BI tenant is based. And just to remind you, to check the location of the tenant, in the Power BI service, go to the Help menu and choose About Power BI. And here you can see your data is stored in UK South. So it's very important that when we configure the gateway, we make sure that the region is the same as the region in which the Power BI tenant is located. And then finally, we click on Configure. Once the registration is complete, we're given this Clean Bill of Health message, and you'll notice that as well as being set up for use with Power BI, the gateway can also be used to refresh data sources used in PowerApps and Microsoft Flow. Once you've registered the initial gateway in a cluster, to add gateways to the same cluster, you simply repeat the process of registering a new gateway, but this time you specify that you want to add it to an existing cluster. So here I am on another machine, and I've gone through the same steps as we saw in the last video. I click Next to register a new gateway, and let's call this one Training 8. But this time I'm going to choose Add to an existing gateway cluster, and from the drop-down I can choose Training 7. And of course what I'll now have to do is to enter the recovery key that I entered when creating Training 7. And then when I click on Configure, instead of creating a new cluster, this gateway will be added to the existing one. And it really is as simple as that. Having added a second gateway to the cluster, I now have the luxury of being able to restart one of the machines, or to stop the service on one of those machines for maintenance purposes, for example, without compromising the gateway service as a whole. Because of course, if one gateway in the cluster is not available, one of the other gateways will automatically be used. Let's put that to the test. In the Power BI service, in the Settings menu, we choose Manage Gateways. And the first thing you'll notice is that only Training 7 is mentioned. If you remember, Training 8 was added as a gateway in an existing cluster, in the Training 7 cluster. So Training 8 can't therefore be accessed as a separate gateway. Let's look at what happens if Training 7 goes offline. Let's simply stop the service. So the Training 7 gateway is now unavailable. Let's go back to the Power BI service and refresh. And if you look closely at the listing of the cluster, you'll see that Training 7 temporarily has an error icon next to it, but it immediately disappears when Training 8 is found. So let's reload the page. And if we look at that in slow motion, you can see that there's a brief period where it finds that Training 7 is offline, but then it trips over automatically to Training 8, and the gateway cluster as a whole is then given a clean bill of health. So that's all there is to setting up a cluster, and given that it is so straightforward, if you don't use this facility and you simply have a single gateway, you're really asking for trouble. It's far better to have at least 2 gateways in the cluster, so if there is a problem with one, your refreshes and your DirectQuery and live connections can all continue to function. In this video, We'll look at the procedure for adding a SQL Server database to a gateway. And we'll also look at the dual role that the gateway plays in connecting to on-premises SQL Server databases. And of course, the role depends on whether you're working in DirectQuery or import mode. So here we have a couple of reports, one in DirectQuery mode and the other in import. And in all other regards, the two reports are identical. So on the left, if I switch across to model mode, open up properties, highlight one of the tables, and then press Ctrl A to select all of them. In the advanced section, you'll notice that the storage mode is DirectQuery. And let's do the same thing with the other report. Select all the tables, and here we can see that the storage mode of all 5 tables is import. So let's now publish both of these reports into the Power BI service. So the first one is successfully published, as is the second. So let's now move into the Power BI service and look at the behavior of the two reports. Let's start with event sales import. And of course, because all the data is imported into the report, everything functions normally. Now let's take a look at the report which is in DirectQuery mode. And this time, of course, we can't access the report because the data that's driving the report is on premises. And we've now published into the Power BI service. So until we configure a gateway, we have no mechanism for accessing the on-premises data. So before this report can be displayed, we'll need to add the data source credentials to our gateway. To do this, we go into Settings and choose Manage Gateways. And then here in the top left, we click on Add Data Source. And let's call our new data source Event Sales. And of course, the data source type is SQL Server. And then we enter our credentials, the server name, the database, in this case event sales, and the authentication method, which in this case will be Windows. And if you're following this course on a Windows 10 machine, what you need to put here is your login credentials. But you need to put first of all the domain, followed by \, and then your username. And then the password, and finally click the Add button. And our connection is successful, so we're good to go. Let's now configure our dataset. So we'll go across to Datasets and find Event Sales DirectQuery. And then from the ellipsis menu, let's choose Settings. And here we click on Gateway Connection and switch on the option to use a data gateway. Obviously, we only have a choice of one gateway, so it's already highlighted. And the final thing is to specify that our SQL Server connection maps to the data source that we've just created called event sales. And you'll notice that for convenience, we've also got the option to add the data source to the gateway if we hadn't already done so. And then we simply click on Apply, and our gateway is configured. So let's go back to our report. And now that we've got a mechanism in place, we can actually see the report. And as our users interact with the report, the database is being queried in real time using the mechanism provided by the gateway. And in the case of DirectQuery, no further configuration is required. By contrast, when we're working in import mode, we use the gateway for refreshing the data and keeping it in sync with the on-premises version. So let's now go into the settings of the event sales import dataset. So our data gateway has already been picked up, and again we'll specify that our SQL Server connection maps to event sales and click on Apply. But this time, of course, we'll need to scroll down and schedule a refresh. And we can specify the refresh frequency, let's say daily, and we can add up to 8 scheduled times. We simply click on Add Another Time, and so forth. And if we were working in a premium workspace, we could add up to 48 times. We then click on Apply, and we're good to go. So that's the process for adding a SQL Server data source to a gateway. And just a reminder that the gateway serves those two purposes, either simply to connect to the on-premises data in the case of DirectQuery, or in the case of import mode, to schedule a refresh and keep the published version of your report in sync with the on-premises data.